In the private sector, nearly 1 in 4 Georgian employees report experiencing sexual harassment at some point in their careers. In the country's civil service, that figure jumps to 34%. Among women in public service with more than 20 years of experience, nearly half have encountered harassment. Yet, despite these alarming numbers, only 9% of private sector victims use formal channels to report incidents. So, what's happening? And why does workplace sexual harassment in Georgia remain largely invisible? Welcome to the CRRC-Georgia Podcast. Today, we're examining one of the most persistent yet hidden challenges facing Georgian workplaces: sexual harassment across both private and public sectors. Drawing from two comprehensive CRRC-Georgia studies, Workplace Sexual Harassment in the Private Sector in Georgia, conducted in partnership with UN Women in 2024 to 2025, and Workplace Sexual Harassment in the Civil Service in Georgia from 2020 to 2021, we'll explore the prevalence, cultural barriers, and institutional failures that keep this issue invisible and allow it to persist. Before examining our findings, let's discuss how we investigated sexual harassment, an inherently sensitive and challenging subject to research, across two distinct workplace environments. Both studies employed a mixed methods approach, combining quantitative surveys with in depth qualitative interviews to ensure comprehensive understanding. For the private sector study, we conducted surveys between September 2024 and January 2025 with 824 employees from across Georgia. Participants were recruited via randomly generated phone numbers and social media outreach, with data from Facebook weighted according to telephone survey data. The qualitative component included 20 semi structured interviews with experts, company representatives, and women who experienced harassment. For the civil service study, our survey took place in late 2020 to early 2021, with 461 civil servants participating. This study involved 35 in depth interviews with civil servants and gender experts. We utilized international standards such as UN guidelines for measuring violence against women and EU survey instruments to ensure consistency and comparability. Crucially, both surveys used a behavioral definition of sexual harassment rather than a legal one. Respondents were asked whether they had experienced specific actions like unwanted touching or explicit comments, rather than whether they had been harassed. This approach captures actual experiences rather than perceptions shaped by legal awareness. Our research reveals substantial levels of sexual harassment across Georgian workplaces. In the private sector, nearly 1 in 4 respondents, 24%, reported experiencing sexual harassment at some point in their careers. For women, the figure rises to 27%, with the highest rates among those under 35 and not married. In the civil service, 34% of respondents reported experiencing harassment during their public service career, with 2 in 5 women reporting such experiences. Among civil servants with more than 20 years of experience, half had encountered harassment, a figure that speaks to the persistence of these problems over time. Across both sectors, verbal and nonverbal harassment, such as sexually suggestive jokes, unwelcome staring, or inappropriate comments, were more common than physical contact. Harassment often occurred in less formal environments, during business trips, corporate events, or even online, particularly since the COVID-19 pandemic. But what explains why such widespread harassment remains largely invisible? Our research identifies several interconnected factors that perpetuate this invisibility. First, social pressures play a crucial role. In both studies, respondents, especially men, frequently failed to recognize certain behaviors as inappropriate. Inappropriate comments were often dismissed as harmless flirting or part of workplace culture. In the private sector, nearly half of male respondents believed that attractive women should expect sexually suggestive behavior at work. As one private company representative explained in an interview, there's a tendency to rationalize behavior. Maybe it wasn't meant that way. Maybe he's just a good guy. Normalization like this creates an environment where harassment is minimized, excused, or simply not recognized. Despite high prevalence rates, reporting remains extremely low. In the private sector, only 9% of those who experience sexual harassment used formal channels to report it. In the civil service, while attitudes towards reporting are generally positive, 94% say civil servants should report harassment, these beliefs rarely translate into action. The reasons for this massive reporting gap are complex and interconnected. Fear of retaliation emerges as a primary concern, alongside shame, lack of trust in institutions, and belief that reporting won't lead to meaningful change. One striking data point illustrates the social pressure against reporting. 39% of private sector employees said reporting harassment could damage relationships with colleagues. This reveals how institutional silence is reinforced by social consequences that further isolate victims. The institutional response or lack thereof compounds the invisibility problem. In the private sector, 38% of respondents said their company had no policies on sexual harassment. Only 21% said their workplace had a formal response mechanism, and 86% had never attended training on the topic. This institutional neglect sends a clear message. Sexual harassment is not taken seriously, and victims cannot expect meaningful support or protection. Such blind spots are not only institutional but reinforced by gender stereotypes. Often men do not understand that they, too, can be targeted by sexual harassment, as being a target of sexual harassment is traditionally feminized. As such, men who are a victim of such harassment may not understand contextually what occurred and lack the language to accurately describe it. Furthermore, regardless of one's sex, reporting a case of sexual harassment carries a social risk. Many cases go unreported as people fear the social stigma of being a victim, along with potential attacks on their character or even alienation from others in their workplace as a result of reporting. Our research demonstrates that sexual harassment isn't just about sex, it's also about power. In the private sector, the perpetrator of sexual harassment was a supervisor for 41% of women who experienced sexual harassment at their workplace. The root of workplace harassment lies in gender inequality, entrenched hierarchies, and a culture that trivializes women's experiences. Certain groups emerge as especially vulnerable: women with disabilities, LGBTQI+ individuals, interns, and temporary workers. The common thread among these groups is limited power and fewer resources to resist or report harassment. These findings have important implications for understanding workplace dynamics in Georgia. The persistence of harassment across both private and public sectors, combined with institutional silence and cultural normalization, creates a perfect storm for continued invisibility. Our research shows that making sexual harassment visible requires addressing multiple levels simultaneously: individual awareness, organizational culture, legal implementations, and societal attitudes. For the government, the path forward involves launching nationwide awareness campaigns, mandating trainings for employers, and improving oversight and enforcement through inspections. Legal frameworks must be backed by robust implementation mechanisms. For employers, this means adopting clear anti harassment policies, establishing confidential and independent complaint mechanisms, providing training for all employees, including management, and tracking internal incidents for accountability. Most importantly, though, there must be a shift in culture. Recognition, respect, and zero tolerance are not just slogans, they are prerequisites for safe, equitable workplaces. In conclusion, workplace sexual harassment in Georgia remains invisible not because it doesn't exist, but because societal norms, institutional silence, and weak implementation still outweigh formal legal frameworks. Shame still outweighs justice, and silence still protects the perpetrator, not the victim. For detailed methodology and full report findings, visit our website crrc.ge. Thank you for listening to the CRRC Georgia Podcast. Until next time.